Well, ladies and gentlemen, another election cycle. Now, this one was not as bad as 2020 or 2016, and some of the pollsters were dead on accurate, but there was, when you look at all the swing states, or at least the majority of them, a clear underestimation along with a popular vote underestimation of Trump. So we're going to go through and we're going to look at how accurate the swing states actually were in terms of the polling. And I mean, listen, when it comes to the final result, I did get the final result correct with 312. Some of that was based off of the polling. A lot of that is factoring in the fact that they underestimated Trump in 2020 and 2016. And if Trump is doing this well in 2024, because it was clear Trump was performing better in the polls in 2024 relative to 2016 and 2020. So that was factored in my prediction. And so some of it was, the reason I got the 312 right was because of the polling. Also, you look at some of it's looking at betting, different metrics. But let's take a look at this state by state thing. So you take a look at Nevada. They did underestimate Trump. I'm actually going to update this because not 100% of the vote is in Nevada. So we'll have to see if this margin changes at all. But yeah, they underestimated Trump by like 3.2. New York Times was a total disaster. That's about a 7-point polling miss. Their final poll was Harris +3. I think Emerson is going to grade out pretty well. Obviously, Atlas Intel, they're probably now the gold standard of polling. The amount of polls that they released there at the end, it was like they kept trying to re-release polls until they got one that where Trump was leading North Carolina because they felt their own polling was wrong. And liberals were like, oh, it's their bias. Well, no, they were right. Trump did end up winning North Carolina, and I think they got the margin in North Carolina exactly right. They missed no states, Atlas Intel. They got the correct margin as well, 312. So Atlas Intel was spot on the money. They were within 0.8. You've got some other ones. I mean, really nothing crazy here. Data for Progress, a Democratic pollster, they were off by like 6 points. But yeah, they clearly underestimated Trump, and I underestimated Trump in Nevada. It really felt like Nevada was going to be a very close state. It felt like it was going to be possibly within a point to 2 points. And it does look like a solid Trump win. Now, maybe this slightly goes down because, again, 100%, it's not 100% in terms of the reported, and you will get mail-in ballot dumps at the way end that are heavily Democrat. But I guess it depends where the mail-in ballot dumps come from, because in Nevada, I mean, Trump's like almost winning every county in Nevada. It is pretty crazy. But Clark County, he's down by like 1 the last time I checked. So Nevada, they did miss that by a few points. Looking at Arizona, yeah, they were a lot too conservative on Arizona in terms of the result. And I knew Arizona was going to be an exaggerated margin. I said it was going to be about 4 to 5. It ended up being 5.5. Atlas Intel nailed it again. Their final poll was Trump +5. The result was +5.5. But all these pollsters, listen, when it comes to Arizona, if you were picking Harris to win Arizona, you're just a liberal homer. I mean, there's really no reason out of all of these polls Harris was going to win Arizona. She had practically given up the state back in late summer. At least those were the rumors. So this is a slight polling miss. It's not too bad, though. I mean, if you look at all these polls, you would surmise that Trump was going to win, and Trump did end up winning. You've got New York Times Siena +4. That's a solid poll. Insider Advantage, I would imagine they're going to grade out pretty well again. Trafalgar, Trump +2. They underestimated Trump by 3.5. So that's a Republican pollster underestimating Trump. Rasmussen, Trump +2. They underestimated Trump. And Morning Compost with the tie. So they were really off. I'm sure they're going to have a bunch of bad polls. Well, their final polls were not nearly as crazy in terms of the margins. They really kind of, a lot of the pollsters did that where they herd it together and made everything 50-50, but they were one of them. Their final poll was a tie. That's a 5.5 point miss if that margin holds, which I'd imagine the margin is probably going to be around 5 in terms of the end. But that's another swing state that was underestimated when it comes to Trump. Looking at Wisconsin, very, very close. So obviously they had Harris up, but only by 0.4, and then looks like Trump's going to win by 0.8. Trump was winning in Wisconsin throughout most of the night, and I feel like into early morning yesterday by like 2 points. But I believe there were massive mail-in dumps that went heavily Democrat that made the state a lot closer. So Trump ends up winning it by, I don't know if maybe it'll change by 0.1 or because we don't know if there's 100% in, but there's like 99% in, and Trump's up by 0.8. So they missed this, not too bad, like 1.5 points. Huge miss from CNN. And I guaranteed CNN was going to miss by like 5 or 6 points. It was horrible. That Harris +6 really screwed with the Real Clear Politics average. If they would have had just this, a normal Harris +1, Trump probably would have ended up winning the final aggregate in terms of Wisconsin. But, some of these, Rasmussen had Trump +3, so they overestimated him. New York Times had Harris +2. They missed by 3. Marist had Harris +2. The polls are just so close, and the margin was very close. So I can't really say that that's a terrible polling miss when it comes to Wisconsin, although CNN's was a really, really bad one. Looking at Michigan, Trump ends up winning it by around 1.5, so a polling miss of 2 points. Atlas Intel nails that. They say +2. The final result is 1.5. Trafalgar did very well. You had Emerson with a Harris +2. They missed a little bit. Marist was real bad. Harris +3. That's a 4.5 point miss by them. You've got a bunch of ties. Really nothing crazy, but they did technically have Harris at the end with a half-point advantage, and Trump ends up winning it. When it comes to Michigan, a little bit surprised Michigan was a bigger margin than Wisconsin, but not totally, just because they're going to be close in terms of all the Rust Belt states. We thought Pennsylvania was the most conservative out of all of them, and it does look like it will be. Trump ends up winning it by about 2 points. Atlas Intel, Emerson both had Trump +1, so those are solid polls. New York Times had it as tied. Trafalgar, Insider Advantage, both had Trump +1. So all of these polls are really good, honestly, just looking at them. Echelon went a little bit crazy with the Trump +6, but Marist misses again, Harris +2. Data for Progress, just looks like some liberal crap poll that they really shouldn't include. They missed that again. Rasmussen, Trump +2, they nailed it. Trump wins by 1.9. So not a terrible polling miss there. You missed by 1.5, but you had Trump winning, and he ends up winning. Some of the individual pollsters like Marist and CNN and Data for Progress, they were really bad. See, Morning Consult ended up going with the tie in their final poll. That wasn't what it previously was, but their final poll got really, really close. Moving on to North Carolina, Trump ends up winning it by 3.3. The final margin was 1.2. So every state, it looks like they did underestimate Trump, outside of maybe Georgia. We'll get to Georgia in a second, but they underestimated Trump by about 2.1. Atlas Intel, Trump +2. He ends up winning it by 3.3. North Carolina was the one where Atlas Intel, they kept getting a Harris result, and then they kept redoing the poll, and then they got a Trump result days before the election. New York Times misses it by about 5, so New York Times had a rough time in some of these states. Rasmussen nails it directly. Trump +3.3. They said he would win by 3. Morning Consult didn't do too bad. Trafalgar nails it. Trump +3. A lot of these Republican pollsters, Insider Advantage did solid. But I mean, when you look at North Carolina, there's no way, and there were liberals that predicted Harris would win North Carolina. Any of these polls, there's no way you would say that. Just looking at these final polls, it's just hopium. There's no actual logic behind Harris winning the state based off of all of these polls and the fact that Trump normally is underestimated in the polls, and he was underestimated again. Trump 1.2, he ends up winning it by 3.3. But it's like, looking at these polls, you can't say these polls were horrible. I mean, they had Trump winning, and he won. It's just, it feels like liberals really got led astray with some individual polls like the Iowa poll, and that's what ended up, being a real problem there. And then taking a look at Georgia, this might have been the only one. Nope, they also underestimated him. So Trump was underestimated in every swing state again, it looks like, but it wasn't by the same margins as we saw in 2020 or 2016. So the current results, Trump +2.2, the average was 1.3, so not a terrible miss, less than a point. Atlas Intel nails it. I mean, Atlas Intel is off by in a lot of these by 0.3. Like, it's they're on the money. Insider Advantage, Emerson, they had a decent cycle. New York Times, they're going to grade out horribly. They had Harris +1. That's a 3-point miss there. Data for Progress, that should be removed from this. That's a liberal pollster propaganda machine. But yeah, other than that, Morning Consult had a nice poll there. Trafalgar had a good poll. Rasmussen had Trump +5. He won by 2.2, so they overdid it a little bit. But this is another state where Georgia was such a consensus. You had these two polls that came out. Really, Georgia throughout the last 2 weeks, it was all Trump, and then these two polls, I guess, came out really late. I don't even remember seeing these because Trump was winning every poll in Georgia. But yep, so every single pollster, and then you take a look at the just Trump versus Harris popular vote. This popular vote is going to change. It's got Trump +3.3. Once California comes in, I think the final results will be about Trump +1.8, 1.7. So if that's the final, they underestimated Trump again. The final numbers did have Harris sitting +0.1. Marist was horrible. They had Harris +4. That's the ABC News poll. Ipsos, Harris +2. Forbes, Harris X, Harris +2. Rasmussen had Trump +3. He's up by 3 right now, but it looks like CNBC is probably going to be the closest, and so is Fox News. They both had Trump +2, and he's probably going to win by like 1.8. So there is that. Atlas Intel had Trump +1. They're right on the money again. So yeah, Trump was underestimated. It wasn't by the same margin. And then you take a look at the betting odds. The betting odds pretty much nailed it. There was this fake surge that, as you can see right here, that wasn't the fake surge. The fake surge happened right here. You saw Trump get up to around 64, 65. This is all of the betting sites. This is not just Polymarket. It's all of the betting sites combined. And then the fake surge happens in the final days with the Iowa poll, with the Marist and CNN polls. They both had Harris winning the election. And then obviously the new odds. These odds were from yesterday. Trump's at a 99%. So obviously it's over. But I mean, to me, the betting did very well. The Harris did go ahead here for a bit, which, it's going to fluctuate. There were more positive polls. It's just, the betting is just going to be an extension of the polls. That's what it is. There were a lot of liberal people that were saying, oh, it's just, it's Polymarket and it's conservative degens. No, these are all the betting markets combined. Polymarket was not acting any different than any of the other betting markets. They were all similar. It wasn't like Polymarket had Trump at 65% and all the other betting markets had Trump at 35%. And people kept telling me, they're like, you shouldn't be looking at the betting. The betting had gotten 10 out of the last 11 elections right. I said, if you're Trump, you want to be the favorite in terms of the betting going into the election. It's going to be a lot easier. And I mean, it was the easiest thing ever. If you looked at the betting and the live Polymarket update, Trump never trailed. He was at 65% right at 7 o'clock. Or I think it was like 58 because he went down a little bit. And then he just kept going up and up and up and up because the updates came in and they kept getting more and more positive for Trump. So the betting pretty much nailed it. And it is just an extension of the polls. The polls were decent this year. If you used context clues, if you had factored in 2016 and 2020, you would very easily get a result. Now, I will say the polls in a lot of the other states that were the non-swing states, that's where they really messed up. They did mess up bad in the non-swing states. If you look at some of these other polls and like look at Florida, for example. So Trump won Florida. That's a 5-point miss. The Compost missed it by 8 points. Yeah. Marist missed it by 9 points. I'll tell you what, Marist, how is it? So, no. Because of the way they do polling grades, I think Marist is great. Instead of being an A, they're going to move to being an A+. I'm not even kidding you. That's how they do these polling grades. The more wrong you are, the better grade you get. So Marist was terrible. They'll probably be an A+ next cycle in 2026. They're probably going to be look at New York Times. Remember that poll? New York Times had some not good swing state polls, but that's hilarious that poll that came out like right in early October, and all the liberals were like, that's crazy. And they were within a point. That's a pretty crazy poll, man. Texas is another one that would have been a miss. Yeah, Texas closed. That's crazy that it closed with Trump +9. Throughout the entire cycle, it was like Trump +6.5. I swear it was. But it closes +9, so they missed by 5. Some of these polls, the Compost misses by 7. Yeah, I mean, Atlas Intel what did Atlas Intel have? Trump +11. I mean, that's a solid poll. That's the best poll out of any of them Atlas Intel had. I mean, Atlas Intel is really, really nailing a lot of these numbers. Now, let's look at Virginia. Atlas Intel had Harris +5. She won by 5.2. And this was very good. This was very good. The average was +5, and she won by 5.2. Yeah, that's a good average. They didn't even include that Christopher Newport poll that liberals kept referencing, like, oh, it's so good. It was off by 5 points, or 6 points almost. Rasmussen had Harris +3. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is in Virginia. It doesn't surprise me too much that it ended up being that result. Minnesota ended up being 4.2. Atlas Intel had Harris +2, so they got that one wrong by a few points, but Rasmussen was a point off. Minnesota Post had a good poll there. But Minnesota and Virginia were pretty similar. I think, let's see the New Jersey polls. There were 2. Yeah, nobody polled New Jersey, but that's crazy. I knew that this poll was terrible, this Rutgers poll. I expected it to be like an 11 or 12-point loss in New Jersey for Trump, somewhere around there. Maybe a little bit less, but crazy margin, 4.9. But I mean, there's limited polling there. You can't really say much about that. I'm sure they got Ohio a little bit wrong. Trafalgar really underestimated Trump by 4 points there. Emerson pretty much nailed it. I mean, they weren't that far off. They had it plus 9.3. Trump won it by 11.3, so they underestimated Trump by 2 points. Illinois, there was basically no polling. That's unfortunate. I would have liked to see some polling in Illinois because of how close it was. New York, there was some really bad polling. Yeah, Siena always overestimates Dems in New York. They overestimated Biden. They had Biden up by like 30 in their final poll in 2020, but you can see plus 19 down to a plus 11.5. That's crazy that it ended up being 11.5 in New York. New York, man. People are talking about it being a swing state. It's not going to be a swing state, but New Mexico. New Mexico was was decent, but they underestimated Trump a little bit. You had Rasmussen right on the money. That was Rasmussen's final poll. Harris plus 5. She won it by 5.1. Really, really good poll because I used that poll as a reference in New Mexico, and it was pretty much right on the money in terms of that. Iowa, there is the Selzer poll right there. Harris plus 3. Final results. I mean, Emerson underestimated Trump. Emerson had Trump plus 10. Trump won by 14. That wasn't even a real poll. That Des Moines, that's the Selzer poll. It's just not a real poll. There's no way. There's no way you can be that accurate for that many cycles and then be 17 points off that close to the election too. This wasn't a poll in August, you know? And that's crazy that they went with that when Trump won it by 9.5, 8.2, and then he wins it by 14, and they're still that far off. I just think it's a fake poll. There's no way. But yeah, so they basically underestimated Trump everywhere. It looks like Maine, they got decent, but this is pretty much more of the same as in kind of what we're normally used to in terms of these states. Let me take a look at New Hampshire here. Current results. They also underestimated Trump in New Hampshire. You had Rasmussen, Harris plus 1. He lost by 2.8. You had Emerson with a very solid poll. Harris plus 3. I'll tell you what, Atlas Intel, Rasmussen, Emerson, these pollsters are going to grade out very well, I would imagine, just by looking at these numbers. And we know the liberal pollsters, again, are going to grade out terribly. I mean, it's the same thing every time. They just always underestimate conservatives. Let's take a look at the top battlegrounds if you put them all together. Yeah, so I mean, we're not going to be able to see a comparison, though. But Trump won the top battlegrounds by definitely more than 0.8. I can tell you that. Probably by like 2 or 3, because if you add the Arizona win, maybe about like 3.5, honestly. But either way, I mean, the polls underestimated Trump. It wasn't as bad as 2020 or 2016. I mean, you could definitely look at the polls and say Trump is going to win every swing state because of how close the polls are. Trump closed winning most of the swing states. The only swing states he was losing was Wisconsin and Michigan, and that was because they were polls at the way end that pushed Harris up. Trump was winning all the swing states according to the polling for a while. The margins were not as big as Trump won a lot of these states by, so they did underestimate him. But still, when I made my prediction of 312, I did take into account the polls. It wasn't this blind faith in Trump. I mean, the polls were not as far off as they were in 2020 or 2016, and there were some very accurate polls like Atlas Intel. Rasmussen was good. Emerson was pretty good. And you've got some crap polls like Marist, who had a terrible cycle. Morning Consult had a horrible cycle. Bloomberg, I think Bloomberg just stopped polling at a certain point. They were one of the worst throughout the entire summer, but I don't even think they released final polls. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.